Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for tuning in to these conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. Do continue to share, subscribe, review this great podcast. It helps us get out there to the masses. It helps in the algorithm. It helps people discover these podcasts. We need you to help us get the word out there to the masses. You can find us on DC Radio. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and my personal favorite, Spotify. Leave a review. Thanks. So, my next guest is we've got a great one. Like I can't even hide it. We got a great one with over 40 years of expertise, nearly 50 if I'm being honest. My guest today is a Marconi and Billboard award-winning on-air personality and radio programmer. Their impressive career spans New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and of course Washington D.C. with notable contributions at Sirius XM satellite radio. My guest is a music historian, curator, podcast producer, and concert promoter. They excel in startup ventures, brand building, and marketing, particularly to the African-American market. Please welcome this industry giant, the great Maxx Myrick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. The honor is all mine. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Well, thank you. I mean, there's there's photographic evidence, right? You know, at the 6th anniversary, I was there. You know, I was just in the background, and then the funny part about it, right? Just as far as the DC Radio 6th anniversary sort of get together, which was just really, really cool. And again, thank you for that invite. The picture that was taken, it happened to have my logo in the background on the ticker.
Yeah,
like, hell yeah. The timing was great. So, you know, it's great to have you here. And, you know, to kind of start off things, I like to open it up in this way. I like to have the guests, you know, introduce themselves. And the reason I do that, you know, there is something that's always lost in the sort of online bio and the artist statement. I like to hear who the person is, how they introduce themselves, you know, to the community. So if you will, could you introduce yourself for the fine folks out there? And then we'll go into sort of the sort of earlier bullet points.
Sure. Well, my name is Maxx Myrick. I am a broadcaster, radio professional. I have been in this business professionally since 1976. So that's quite a few years. I guess I'm on my 47th year now. And I have built radios and operated radio stations all over the country. Some of the most notable ones are XM satellite radio, created the Real Jazz channel, the Latin Jazz channel, and the Neo Soul channel for that platform. Yeah. When we first started in 2000, I was signed on WVAZ in Chicago, V103, which is still the #1 station in Chicago. I signed on WALR in Atlanta, which is still a top tier station on #1, 2, or 3, somewhere like that. You know, so I've been building enduring brands, you know, for most of my career. I've been lucky to work with some wonderful people and had some good mentors. And I've tried to pass that along as much as I can. And I like to describe myself as, you know, I hold people accountable, but I let them do their job and I try to be fair. And most people think I'm a nice guy until they, you know, tell I'm not.
Thank you. That's great. And I get that vibe. And again, just, you know, like I said earlier, you know, you guys welcome me in as the outsider from up the street. So I definitely sort of appreciate that. And, you know, looking over, you know, your bio and looking over your background, I was trying to pull out there's so much in here. I don't want this to be a 2 to 3 hour podcast. I'm trying to get this in 40 minutes. But with it, I always like to, after the introduction, is get a sense of some of those early points. You know, I've mentioned, and I had it actually, you know, brought up during this podcast, you know, where this interest in being in front of people and sharing stories kind of presented itself at a very early age, at 5. You know, I was an MC and I had a theater person actually point out no, you were in front of people. This is kind of what you're doing. You're just doing the next phase of that, and, you know, sort of doing a podcast and presenting to people and talking with people. So for you, what were some of those early things that maybe laid some of the foundation for how you approach your work or your early interest in radio or things of that nature? What led you on your path maybe from your youth?
Well, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and at the time I grew up, we didn't have black radio
Mm.
in Toledo. We didn't have black radio until in Toledo until 1968. So I listened to, being so close to Detroit and being so close to Canada, I listened to a station called CKLW, which was a monster signal. It covered Detroit, Ohio. They gave the they gave the weather in Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, and then they came back and gave it in Celsius for Canada. It was a monster. It's called the Big Eight, and everything about that station was just bigger than life.
Yeah.
And being so close to Detroit, they had to be a little more soulful. So they played the requisite amount of Canadian music that was available, but the rest of it was all about Detroit, which was great for us because, they played a lot of black music. The DJs they were kind of hip. They were all white though,
yeah,
but they sounded like that. I didn't know they weren't black until I met Ted Richards one time, and he looked like Clint Eastwood. I was like, wow, this is. But then later on, in my family, my mother, she loved music.
Hmm.
And so music was all around all the time. And I used to go to the music store on the weekends and get the latest records because they at that time, they had the tip sheets. The radio station would put out tip sheets. And the tip sheets were like a list of the hot songs.
Yeah.
And so you look down and see if you had all the latest hits. You wanted to have all the latest hits. And then, I have 4 sisters, so, they like to dance. And then in the summertime, we used to go to Sandusky, Ohio, where I was actually born, and stay with my grandmother. And she, you saw that film, Lackawanna Blues?
Yes.
She had a rooming and boarding house just like that, all a cast of characters. And so in the evenings when she would finish all her business, she would play her numbers, because it was a policy time. There were no lotteries. And part of her ritual was to, get her some Kessler's whiskey, a little Miller High Life,
as one does.
Crush. That was the potion. And then she get her dream books and prayer candles out. And then my job was to play the latest music to set the mood for all of this whole ritual that happened every night. But my cousin had a record store. So during the day, I would just spend all my time in the record store, listening to music and watching what people were buying. And I was great. And so then I would bring all the hits home, and my sisters would dance. My grandmother would do her ritual. So all of that combined.
Yeah.
And then later on in around 68, there was a record store in Toledo called Clark's Record Store, Clark's One Stop or something like that. And he at that time, FM was not important. Nobody cared about FM.
Right.
So there was an FM signal that didn't have anything on it that was making money. So they gave him Saturdays for a couple of hours. He bartered the time, and he broadcast live from his record store, playing all the records. And everybody would go down there and buy the records and see him broadcasting live. People were scrambling to get FM because there was no FM radios around. Right. So that's where we were introduced to local radio. And then because it was so popular and they started making so much money, they made it full time. And so all the jocks in Detroit that couldn't get on WJLB or CHB or whatever stations that were on there, everybody can't get on the radio. A lot of talented people out here. So they heard about this station that was looking for people. So they came down. And so it was like the cream of the crop in terms of personalities. And that was big personality time. So those personalities were big, like the ones on CKLW, but they were all black. And so they were speaking a different language that I could understand it. Right. I could start to tell the difference right away. And then you could see them, because they'd be out, and they're oh, that's that's Paul Brown. They had names Charlie Chuck, and they were just. And so I said, man, I want to do that. And so later on, I did. I went to the Marine Corps, and while I was in the Marines, we were out in we were out in the Mediterranean for a long time, like 7 months, and you'd be out there 30 days at a time, and so they had a ship entertainment system. So I just hang out in there when we weren't doing Marine Corps stuff.
Yeah.
And they let me, run the system. And when I got back, I enrolled in the University of Toledo. I got a job at a club, at a restaurant that was a nightclub, because disco was hot then, around 70, 76. And so I enrolled in the University of Toledo. They had a campus radio station.
Yeah.
And I met my lifelong friend, Michael Stratford, and he introduced me to a guy named Michael St. John, who was one of the jocks over there. He knew, that's an old school radio name, Michael St. John. he introduced me to Gary Outlaw, who was the music director. And they let me come over there as a part-time employee. And I when I wasn't in school, I was living over there, and in between that and work. And so one time I forgot to go to the club, and they fired me. So they just gave me more time to hang out at the radio station. Eventually, I got a full-time job, and the rest is history.
Wow, thank you.
And that was the station I grew up listening to as a child, so it was even more thrilling.
No, that's really cool. Like when you have the opportunity. My dad's around, same age, veteran as well, so Marines, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now I'm getting it. Now I'm I knew I was getting the vibe off of you. Now I'm like, oh, right. Light skinned dude, Marine, got it. But yeah, it's great to hear that sort of trajectory, and kind of being around music in different ways, being around sort of the curation in different ways. And, one thing I'll throw out there, I do, in addition to this podcast, this interview podcast, I do one that I need to spend more time doing, but I do a movie review podcast. And the job I used to have at my home was pretty much you're reading the TV guide when those existed, right? And It's just like, oh, so Junior, what's good tonight? Tell us. And it's just like, almost like, all right, I'm responsible for the TV entertainment tonight, and I need to make sure it's good. So I'm reading the TV guide feverishly. And it's like, all right, channel 13, there's something good on there.
Right.
So yeah, that was one of my jobs. When we have those jobs at home, especially when it comes to the entertainment and the rituals associated with it, better make sure it's good.
Yeah. You just keep doing it and doing it. I remember I worked out a job working at a record store later on in my career, and I loved when people would come in the store and I could size them up, and at first I would just play something, and if they didn't react, they'd come over and ask for something. I'd look at what they were looking at. They'd come over and ask for something, and then I based my next selections off of what they asked for. And pretty soon they'd be walking out of there with arms full of albums and 45s. It was, that was a great training.
It's almost like a musical sommelier or what have you. It's like, yeah, so this will pair well with this other thing.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a cardigan.
That's what a music director does for a radio station, basically. You play, you find out what people like, and you find stuff that fits that description. Yeah. And you just keep doing it. And if you keep delivering, giving people what they want, they'll listen longer.
It's true. Sure. So I want to move into this piece a little bit. You'd mentioned earlier, being instrumental in starting and laying the foundation for very successful and from an iconic stations, V103, XM satellite radio. Can you, share some of those insights on what it takes to successfully launch and, manage something that's ultimately super influential? And I think you were touching on it a bit as far as kind of essentially giving people what they're looking for and what they like, but speak a bit on that.
Yeah, my first radio station was WVOI in Toledo. It was actually in Michigan, right over the line. And it was in a house in a cornfield across the street from a redneck bar. It was such an interesting place. And the reason that came about was KLR, the station that I worked for, at around in the late 70s, they two more stations came on, black stations came on in Detroit. FM was starting to become important.
Yeah.
At that point, JLB AM, where Donnie Simpson came from, was still like the big gun in Detroit. But now all of a sudden, DRQ signed on, a company called Amaturo signed on DRQ, Intercity signed on WLBS, and the guy who owned the station, the Booth family, they weren't going to let people, take their franchise, so they took a station they had and made it JLB FM. And so those three stations went at it, and eventually JLB ran them out of town. And in the meantime, they changed the format of KLR in Toledo to country, because they had an AM station that was country.
Yeah.
And they were planning on taking the KLR format and putting it on the AM station. But I got a call from a friend of mine named Dawn Spencer, who heard that there was a new station, a gospel station in Temperance, Michigan, an AM station, that wanted to take the black format and put it on. And so I went out and I was planning on moving to Houston, Texas. A friend of mine named Steve Harris and some of the jocks from KLR had moved down there to a station called Love 94. And I said, well, if they can get a job down there, I can get a job down there. I probably couldn't. I was terrible, but I didn't know. So I in my mind, so I was working all summer. I saved up. I was working at a record store and a U-Haul, saving up my money. And I was out. And so I went out there. I talked to this guy named Paul Ploner, and he convinced me to stay. He said, if you stay 90 days and help me with this, I will pay your way to Houston if it doesn't work out, and I will give you $180 a week, which was, more than I was making.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'll just add that 180 to what I'm, and I'll have more when I get to Houston.
Absolutely.
And so I called KLR and asked them what they were doing with all those records they had. And they said, you can come and get them. So I did. I went and got my car, and I went out there and got all those records. I drove back over to Michigan, and I started assembling that radio station. At first, we were only played black music at night, and we played all these religious shows. I mean, they were crazy. They was like, they were just, one guy had to have a bodyguard. It was just craziness, but they paid on time. And so, and eventually, as we went along, we phased them out. It was owned by a company called J-Core Communications. That's why they were gospel. Mm. Terry Jacobs was Terry Jacobs. Terry Jacobs' company eventually became Clear Channel, and Clear Channel eventually became iHeart. But that was the beginning. He only had 3 little radio stations at the time, and they were trying to take that company public, which they eventually did. And so I started building the radio station with a guy named Donnie Walker, and we put it together, and then we started hiring people, and we started playing music. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just playing my favorites, and and I was a DJ too, so I was in the streets. I had a sense of what people wanted to hear, but I was all over the place. And the record companies, we became reporters, and once you become reporters, you affect the charts.
Right.
And when you affect the charts, then record companies become interested in you. And then they send their reps down to try to convince you to play their records. And so then I was trying to be buddies with everybody. And so I played everybody's records. And so finally I got a call from another lifelong friend, the late Steve Harris. And he said, stop letting those people, actually it was a guy named Walt Baby Love who called me and said, stop letting those people take advantage of you. And And then he said, I'm going to have this guy named Steve Harris call you. And then Steve took me through the fundamentals of programming and how to set up clocks and rotations and how to have some discipline. And then, you know, I wasn't so generous. And the station started sounding more consistent. And I learned these things, I learned, I made mistakes, made mistakes. And after about 4 years, I knew what I was doing for the most part.
Yeah.
And so that led to another station. And then I moved down to, I went to Cincinnati to do mornings. And then I moved down to put a station on in South Carolina, Z104. And that went up to number one. And then, I was feeling pretty good now. I think I know what I'm doing. I went, but they were bankrupt, so it was a mess. So I went to Richmond, Virginia, and put on the first satellite radio station in the United States.
Really?
In 1988, yeah. And so that was, that's kind of set the stage for my thinking about satellite radio in 1988, because I didn't go to XM satellite radio to 2000. So it was a long time, but we were, already on that technology. So I was really, thinking about the future. And I went from there to Cleveland for a little while. I was about to quit. I couldn't take it. I was living in like the transient hotel by the racetrack. At night it was like a lot of moaning and groaning. And I was like, I can't. I'm going to get me a job doing regular stuff,
But what was that like in that moment where, because
I had children. I had a wife. They moved with me to Cincinnati. They moved with me to South Carolina. One of my kids was born in South Carolina. The rest of them were born in Ohio. So, but my wife was like, no, we need some stability. So she moved back to Cincinnati, and there she's still there now. We're not together, but so I had responsibilities. I was trying to have this career and trying to stay married, and be there for my kids as much as I could. It was hard to get home. It was real sad. It was tough on me. I cried a lot, when they didn't see me. And so then I got a chance to go to Atlanta in 1990 and put a new station on, another one called WALR. And that was a great station. It was called Love Songs and a Touch of Jazz. It was the smoothest station ever. And it was in the CNN Center. We had resources for the first time. I mean, we were just, I was like, oh, I saw a whole nother world, a whole nother light that I hadn't seen before. And prior to going to Atlanta and Cleveland, though, I made a stop in, I made a stop in Shreveport, Louisiana. Oh, my God. I don't know what year they were in, but that was 1988.
Yeah.
And then I went to Chicago from there. And then they fired me in Chicago the first time at V103 when I helped sign the station on 1988. And then they fired me because I was terrible on the air. I wasn't terrible, but I was terrible for them.
Yeah.
Big personality market. Everybody can't do that. And that's not my stick. So, but anyway, I ended up in Atlanta. I put that station on. It did well. Still doing well. And then I got fired again because they got new owners. And the guy they brought in to oversee that and I, no, we didn't see eye to eye. And I wasn't going to Tim Scott myself, So I went and put another station on in Pensacola, Florida. And this station was a huge station. It was like 100,000 watts. It was, you could hear it in Pensacola. You could hear it all the way to Louisiana.
Oh,
It
wow.
was a beast. They didn't even have a local phone number. Everything was 800. It was just a monster. We went to number one in Mobile and Pensacola, like one 30-day period. It was a monster.
Wow.
Then I got a call to come back to Chicago. And came back as music director, which is what I wanted to do in the first time I was there.
Right.
You know, being on the air was the only way I could get up there. And my dream had always been to work in Chicago and program a number one station in Chicago. That was my dream from KLR days. I always wanted to do that. So this was my opportunity. You know, since I didn't quit and I went on to Atlanta and Pensacola, and I felt vindicated. So I went to Chicago, and the program director quit like a year in, and then we were launching a hip hop station too. So I had to do both of them for a little while, and the station went to number one in Chicago. I cried tears in front of the staff. They didn't know what was wrong with me, but it was my dream. So it stayed number one, number two for the whole 8 years I was up there. And it's still the number one station in Chicago right now. And so I left there and went to, they asked me if, things were changing, consolidation. I didn't like the direction. You know, the guy wanted me to change the number one station. And I asked him if I changed the station,
sure,
am I going to be like number one plus? Because my contract says you get paid on rank. Am I going to get a bump? He was like, well, no, we just want you to, play ball. I'm like, well, I'm not playing ball.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, then he got mad, told me I should be kissing his butt because he was in that position. And I said, white boy, that is a sensation you will never experience. So at that point, I started, looking at other options.
Yeah.
And XM Satellite Radio was hiring. And my friend Steve Harris was trying to get that job as the vice president of programs. So I waited until he got the job. And then I went and talked to them. And they didn't have anything I had just won a Marconi Award that year too, so that didn't hurt. And so I had, they asked me if there's anything else I liked. And I said, I love jazz. And they said, well, you think you could build a jazz radio station? I said, sure, I can build a jazz radio station. So that's what I did. I remember as a kid growing up listening to a station in Detroit called WJZZ. It was the greatest jazz station that ever was. And so I just built real jazz around that station, that idea. It was just a regular radio station.
Sure.
With the same imaging that a regular radio station has, but it was cool. It was jazz stuff. And it would just happen to play jazz. Yeah. And people liked it. And, pretty soon they had 1 million listeners. And, and I stayed there for 8 years. And then there was consolidation, and I moved to Nashville, and they didn't want me in Nashville. And so they found somebody to take my place who's still there. And I then came back to DC and ran WHUR for about 4 years.
Yeah.
Top tier station there, heritage station, the inventor of I was honored to work there, inventor of the Quiet Storm format, a legendary station.
Yeah.
Then they asked me to, the city asked me to build them a station. And here we go again. I just, I built them a station called DC Radio, and I've been doing that for the last 6 years, in between doing other things, on the side.
I love it. I love how, what I do as I'm going through this is I like to let the person cook, like you've knocked out like 4 of my other questions. So shout out to you. You make my job easier. But yeah, let's talk a bit about DC Radio. I mean, that's, one of the ways that I became aware of you, and then, and sort of getting us to this point, what I guess in looking at DC radio and sort of this market specifically, this DC, the DMV, this whole area, what what are some of the, I guess, some of the thinking that goes into who fits within it, who fits within the format? Because there's music, there's podcasting, there's different personalities, and I'm being one of them on there. I guess I have to definitely ask. But what makes someone fit within it? And what was your aim with DC Radio?
Well, I mean, like all stations, you want to have some kind of cohesiveness. The idea of DC Radio originally was it was a partnership between the city and HUR.
Yeah.
HUR has 4 frequencies on their signal. And so we leased the HD4 signal, and it was just going to be all talk.
Yeah.
And then the director at the time, Angie Gates, had some other ideas. So she hired me, and we tried to make it, give it some depth. So we started just, trying to find people who were talented and give them a shot.
Yeah.
Find people who were serious too, because a lot of people came and they wanted to do it, and then they did it a couple of days, a couple of times, and they were like, "This is work. I don't want to do this." It's like, yeah, it's work, but you're learning. You got a platform. You're getting your content out there. You're building consistency. We put your content on every streaming platform. It's associated with other great content, and so we just started doing that. We created a pitch session every 6 months, and we started getting people coming in, giving us pitches for their shows, and if they seemed serious enough and they had great ideas, we'd give them a shot. Yeah. And they all turned out to be some of the stations, because we don't pay for content,
right?
So some of the people have been with us the whole 6 years. They just continue to embrace the platform, and we continue to love having them on. And it's just, we have really good, there's some really talented people in this area who just need an opportunity. Radio is not going to give them one.
Yeah.
The internet is another space, and some of them have internet things going on too. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
In fact, that's where the future is coming from. The internet, the companies aren't developing people. They're just finding out who's got the most likes and views and trying to sign them up, and they think that's going to create the next, thing. And it may or may not. It worked for the Breakfast Club, because I've never heard their radio show, but they took that Breakfast Club right into the Radio Hall of Fame. So,
And that's one of the things that definitely want to hear more about is sort of so. And I'm coming from there today. Actually, I'm teaching a group of high school seniors podcasting. I've been doing it for about 15 years. So just passing it along and trying to help them realize their interest and learn from my mistakes, as I put it, and because I've made all of them. And I think in it. In preparing lessons and going through this sort of process of building out a class, you see sort of this focus of we need to have these personalities that may not have sort of the wherewithal, but to your point, they have all of these likes and they have this, but it's like, that doesn't mean that they're a podcaster. They might be a personality in this sort of context, but not everyone has the stamina, or even in doing this, I don't have a problem with doing a bunch of podcasts. I've never had. I can just,
Stamina is a good word. Consistency, stamina. I mean, radio is just a distribution platform. And what makes it work is consistency. Just repetition. And you build a relationship with the audience based on that content. And now it's expanded. So now you have to engage with that audience on other platforms, because the audience has so many options. Right. But the online thing is just such an opportunity because you don't have any barriers. Right. You can cuss all you want. You can, say whatever you want to say. There's no FCC to stop you. You can build your base you just have to, it takes work. You just have to keep, find something that you think people might be interested in or that you're interested in. Find an audience for it and engage with that audience and build that audience. If it's good, they'll share it with other people, and you just keep going, going, going. And one day, it will be where you dreamed it would be. You just have to, you can't stop. If that's what you want to do, that's the place to do it before they shut it down. With the politics being the way they are, they don't want people to have that kind of voice and power. So now while that window's open, I would, if I were somebody jumping in this business, that's where I would go.
100%.
It's going to be hard to get in. You can't get into commercial radio. It's hard. They're, they own everything. Where are you going to go? And the stuff they're very little local. I mean, there's very few stations like HUR, which is Black owned and operated.
Yeah.
It's its own thing. Everything else is owned by corporations. And, there's all kinds of things going on there. And then they have syndication, and they want to put their syndication on all this. So there's very little opportunities. There are very little independent, very few independent stations. And the internet gives you a chance. I mean, I love during COVID that so many people took advantage of that. Country One is my favorite person. He turned those little skits into like $20 million.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He just consistently came up with great content that people started sharing, and it just grew and grew and grew into a Netflix special, movies, and all kinds of stuff. Well, you can do the same thing. Anybody can do that if you got good content. Now, if you got crappy content, crap in, crap out.
And that's the thing I try to impress upon, like, my students or anyone that's just interested in it. Like, folks who pick my brain, ask me to, chat with them. And, I definitely throw the stamina thing out there, but also I am like, look, are you doing test recordings? Let's get these reps in, like really figure out what it is, what's your thing. And know that it's not the finalized thing, but really what's your idea and can you grow from it? So, when I talk to folks, I'm like, is it 10 episodes? Is it 12? Is it weekly? Is it a limited series? Things of that nature, and really thinking strategically about it, because, being in doing all of the different parts of this and kind of not knowing what I'm doing and learning over this decade and a half, it's just like, oh yeah, this would be a production nightmare if you do it like this, or why would someone want to listen to you talk about a movie for 70 minutes or what have you? Your actual podcast is longer than the movie, and things of that nature.
People's attention spans are short too.
Yeah.
So you have to have content that can be reduced to sound like minute and a half to draw people to the longer content. I'll give you a good example.
Sure.
Cat Williams was on Club Shay Shay recently, Speaking His Truth, and I have not seen the whole 3 hours.
But you definitely see pieces of it.
I've seen pieces of it, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. You gotta, if you can get compelling pieces,
yeah,
you can draw people to the longer content, and you can make money. That's another opportunity with the internet. You can make money if you have viewers, clicks enough, you have the metrics. Advertisers will pay to get in front of those people.
Absolutely. This episode is brought to you by some soda. I don't know, and
yeah, they just the commercials just play. You'll be in the middle of a great moment in that clip, and you just have to wait 15 seconds while it gets paid.
and that's the thing. Like I think you hit it. You keyed in on something very, very important earlier, and you were talking about sort of HUR and sort of like the bases there, like Black owned, Black operated. And, as I'm doing this, I've had some of those offers to be a part of the hive mind and so on. And I'd rather do what I do. I like to have this sort of independence. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. As I'm doing this podcast, it grew specifically out of Baltimore, right? And I was just like, okay, I want to do this. No one's really doing it or doing it in this way. And then naturally, I'm like, what about DC? What about Philly? What about these other cities that I'm interested in and I see similarities in
Hmm.
how they're discussed? And when I specifically with Washington D.C. and with Philadelphia, I connect with, sort of an outlet there, like a
Hmm.
local radio outlet. Hey, I got a bunch of content that's related to your city. Would you want to put this out there? And generally the answer is like, hell yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Whereas in some markets, it's like, oh, well, we don't know if you're big enough. Maybe my local market. We don't know
Right.
if you're the person. And I'm like, tell me more about what you mean by that. So it's like these other cities that I'm not in, they definitely have my stuff out there because they see sort of the value
Right.
attached to it and what it might represent. And for me, if I weren't independent, if I weren't able just to kind of do it my own way,
Hmm.
I've been told, why are you leaving Baltimore? Why are you going into other cities? I was like, because I
Hmm.
want to, because
Right.
that's where my interests lie. Like I'm going to Detroit and I'm going to Richmond this year to do this same sort of series because
Hmm.
that's where my mind and where my heart is at in
Right.
extending out this conversation and hit those cities that are quote unquote black cities and talking to the artists that
That's the beauty of being independent. You don't have to worry about gatekeepers.
100%. And when I get told point like, well, I don't know if we can fund that because I was like, I'll find a funder. And literally I get very, because I sit down and I talk to certain people because apparently I'm a scary black man. But I'm like, look, I'm still going to do it. So you can either be a part of it or not. It's very, very simple.
And those same people will come back to you, hey, buddy.
100%. They'll say, hey, you want to come over here to this Chicago station? You want to come back? Um, so I got one last real question before I go into these rapid fire questions for you. And
Okay.
in the last real question, because in doing sort of the trajectory, right, there is, I see curation, I see sort of the building out of stations and building out of formats and being in various communities, covering various genres too. What would you say is the sort of like largest change or shift that you've seen over the last few years in terms of building out playlists, building out sort of like what's the sort of programming that we have here, or even artist exposure? You hear about like radio used to be we're breaking musicians on the radio. Now it's Spotify, or now it's
Yeah.
some TikTok clip. What is the biggest change? What advice would you give for the artist seeking to get featured on a station?
Well, I would once again look at social media and the internet if I was an artist, and not worry about radio airplay. They're following social media now. What happened was in the late '90s, early 2000s, consolidation came along. Bill Clinton, under his administration, allowed these big corporations to buy as many radio stations
Mm.
as they wanted to. And so then those companies had to figure out what to do with all of these stations. And so they began consolidating them. And then they started creating syndication to put on all of these stations because they want all of these stations to sound the same. You used to be able to go to a market and that market would sound like that market. Chicago would sound like Chicago. DC would sound like DC. Memphis would sound like Memphis. Every station, every city you would go into would sound like that city. Atlanta, same thing. Now everything sounds the same. You don't know what city you're in.
Right.
You know, every show is on the same. Steve Harvey's on every, every iHeart station, that urban station that they own for the most part. Ricky Smiley is on every um, urban one station that they own that makes sense. It's just they've so that they're programming the same music. The record companies and Live Nation have gotten together, and so that pool of music and artists has been reduced because they make money off of it in so many ways, but specifically concert touring on these crazy ticket prices. But it's the same, if you're not in that loop, it's hard to get in. But there are artists out there that are breaking on social media. October London is a great example. The guy sounds like Marvin Gaye. It's great music. I mean, but he broke on he broke on social media. There's a new song out called "Can I Call You Rose?" I don't know who it's by. It's a group, I think, and that run is breaking big. That song, "Girls Are Players Too." I don't know what the name of that tune is, but
Can I Call You Rose? That's The Sacred Souls. I heard that recently.
They're kind of like what was that young lady, Sharon Dap? They're like the Dap Kings or something like that.
Yes, Sharon and the Dap Kings.
Yeah, that song is killing. And so now, they're about to blow up. But that was because they, put their stuff out there. Tiny Desk Concert. I don't know what it's evolved to. I'm not really happy with the direction it's going in right now with all of this Juvenile and them on there, but cussing and stuff. I'm just not with all that cussing on the radio. Yeah. If I want to hear that, I can just listen to it.
Yeah.
Or else, I just, when I'm ready for that cussing, I just go listen to the cussing. But that's not what I tune in for. But I'm, 66 years old, so, they ain't talking to me. But I cuss, I'm trying not to cuss now, but but I just don't want to hear it. I just don't want to hear it. So, that is what is the challenge.
Yeah.
But, once again, the internet, and then there's what the internet gives you is the whole world. Artists are like, oh, I want to be on the charts. I want to be number one in the U.S. I want to be on my local station. I know friends that have songs in Poland. They're like Michael Jackson over there. They're huge. They're like huge.
And I think that's a part of the sort of challenge where, and I'm looking at it purely from like a podcast and maybe a personality perspective of, yeah, you have the whole world, but it's like, are you speaking to the whole world? Or are you speaking to a very niche thing? And then having that as that loyal 100, 1,000, whatever that might look like, because that turns into what your strategy is, right? Of I'm going for everyone, then you only have limited resources as to how you're going to do it. And it could be this thing of the sort of curse of having so much availability and the internet being so open that.
Well, you target our strategy. Once I started getting research and hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend on research and find, all the resources, I found out that you target narrow, but you market wide. And because you always have to replenish your audience because they have so many audience, they have so many options. So you target narrow, whoever it is that you're going after, but you market wide because you never know who's going to like your stuff. I'm finding out how much white people like Southern Soul through TikTok. King James, that dude, he is killing it. He is like the king. I mean, when these white promoters figure out the Southern Soul is as big as it is, they're going to be huge. So those black promoters are going to be in trouble. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But right now we have it to ourselves. So, we had hip hop to ourselves too.
Look, that's almost a whole nother podcast right there with those thoughts on that. Cause I don't know, like I'm one of those, and because I'm becoming an old man, I guess. And cause I'm creeping up there where, I'm like, man, 2010s had the best rap music. And people look at me and it's like, bro, what are you talking about? But I'm just like, listen to this and listen to how similar it is. Or even applying this same thing, like about podcasters. I look at, those video clips when they're breaking sort of, we had this cool clip. I'm like, why do y'all have the same like gear? I was like, they're sponsored by, Rode or what have you. I was like, I have really good gear and I don't see any of them with the gear that I have. My gear is Zoom. It's very popular gear, but I don't see it in these videos. So it's like kind of the organizations, the companies, the sort of syndication thing. It's like all this is the same. And I'll comment on one last thing before we wrap up on this portion and go into the rapid fire. My love for radio came with loving sort of my local station, like 92Q generally. And, because I'm a Morgan State alum, definitely WEAA.
Hmm.
You'll like this. Initially, I didn't like jazz music. I was like, man, turn this off. Where's the rap music? And my dad was like, you'll eventually get it. And now all of the records I have in my house are jazz records. A lot of Charles
Good for your dad.
Mingus.
I mean, it's the foundation of all this music.
Yeah,
It's the foundation of every jazz and blues are the foundation of all American music. If it doesn't have that in it, it's not really good music.
and this is sort of that challenge where it's like it's lacking something. And I think you're right. It's lacking whatever, because when I think of jazz, when I think of blues music, I think of a feeling. It's
Yes.
something that hits. And some of these things, whether it be the sort of auto correction, whether it be all of these different things that just feel more robotic, and it
Yeah.
feels what's the word? Very processed.
Yes.
It's like I rather when I hear that needle drop and that sort of initial feedback or screw like
Yeah.
this is gonna hit.
That it's got to have that feeling in it. That a lot of the 80s music didn't transfer
Yeah.
because it was all electronic.
Yeah.
It didn't make it because it was all they were just using drum machines and it sounds like the 80s. It doesn't even. But a lot of the music made in the 70s, you can listen to that forever
This is true.
because it was organic. It was made in the studio. It was live musicians. Now hip hop has helped bridge generations by sampling that music, which is great.
Yeah.
A lot of young people think that those are the original versions. So, there's a bit of education that needs to happen. But
It's like you were saying earlier. It's great to hear ladies is because like you can hear the sample of the thing that was sampled. I was like,
yeah,
this is just watered down.
yeah. When I hear a lot of hip hop, the first thing I hear is the sample.
Right.
First thing that's the Isley Brothers, or that's
It's Voyage to Atlantis right there. What do we what?
yeah. But now they're sampling the samples.
And it's a thing of you're looking for it where I forget what it was. It was some song I was listening to, and they had this sample roulette. And it's
Mhm.
like, which one is it? Are you can get the actual one that you like, or a cover
Right.
that's not as good?
Oh, that's a good show. I like that. Yeah, somebody should do that for radio. You should do that.
I might have to do that.
You should. I've been trying to get somebody. I, I don't have time. I want to do it, but I just don't have time to do it. There's a website called Who Sampled,
Yeah.
and it shows you who sampled everything. But most people, if you could do the sample roulette, people would love that because they don't know. They would be like, "What?" And it would help move that. It would help establish bridges between that content. I heard Missy Elliott do a production on Tweet where she took a Louis Armstrong version of Starlight
Yeah.
and mixed it into the song. When I heard the record, I was like, "Is that Louis Armstrong?" That's what I heard. I was like, "Is that Louis?" I didn't even hear a tweet. I was like, "Is that Louis Armstrong?" I was obsessed. Starlight. It was no, not Starlight. Stardust. Stardust. Yes, Hoagie Carmichael. Yes, I was like, "What?" That was genius.
I took the note down, so you might be getting a file from me sooner than later. But
Yeah, you should do that. We would love to have that. We would love for it to originate on DC radio too. Lock that down.
let's make it happen. Okay. So in these final moments, I want to throw some rapid fire questions your way, and the way that I like these to go is whatever the first answer that comes to your mind. It's like don't overthink it. Some people are like, what color do I like? Well, if it was, and I'm like, just if you like blue, just say you like blue, bro. It's that. All right.
Black.
Well, so here's the first one.
Yeah.
What is like a memorable concert that you've attended? Like just one concert that comes to mind, you think of like attending a concert.
Michael Jackson in Wembley in London.
Nice. It's good. It's a good pull. I'm a little jealous. As a music historian, because obviously that's there. I'm seeing it back. I'm looking at records and things of that nature. What era of music do you find to be the most fascinating?
70s.
All right. Top 3 jazz musicians.
Louis Armstrong, my good friend Wynton Marsalis. He's just a genius. I just love him as a personality and a great trumpeter. But Louis Armstrong, Marsalis, I love Monk. I love Duke Ellington. You know, there's so many more. I mean, Miles.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to say Miles. I mean, there's so many. I'm working at Real Jazz and building that.
Yeah.
I had to learn this music. So for 8 years, that's all I listened to. I don't know what was going on other stations. I was just, and I was in New York. I was at Jazz at Lincoln Center, so I was immersed in it.
Yeah.
And I could, and I created a program called In the Swing Seat, where we identified artists just by their sound.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm listening to music and I hear a couple notes and I know who it is, just like a voice.
Yeah.
Instrument's just like a voice. It's their voice. It's they communicate to the language of music. So yeah, that's it. I mean, there's so many. I mean, Coltrane.
Yeah, the Jazz Police come for you if you don't sing Coltrane. The Jazz Police come for you.
Oh yeah, well they've come for me many times, and I told them to go to hell.
That's great. All right, this is the last one I got for you. So as I was saying like early on, we always try to throw in a bit more. So what's a non-music interest that you have? Like some people are like, man, I like to garden. I'm really into cooking, what have you. What is like a non-music interest that you really are, that's a big thing for you?
Travel.
Okay.
I love traveling. I've been traveling since I was 17. I was in the Marine Corps. So when I was 17, I went in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So I began traveling, and then I was overseas. I traveled all over Europe. Before I was, when I got before I was 19, I had traveled to like all of Europe. And so I didn't know where I was when I was over there because I was so young, but I learned a lot and got some experiences. And I went back as I got older to those same places to see it with different eyes. And I love to travel. My favorite place now is Spain and Portugal. I love Lisbon. I love all the Moorish places in Spain. Barcelona. I went last year, or 2 years ago. I went to all the Moorish places: Madrid, Toledo, Cordoba, Granada. I can't think of all of them right now, but I went to all the places where the Moors were, because they ruled Spain from 711 to 1492.
Yeah,
so I went to all of those places because I wanted to be in that space. I wanted to feel those vibrations. And I was just so blown away at the scale of which they created.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have to go back. I was just so much. It was so powerful. So I did this. I've done like the National Geographic Genome. I did the Ancestry.com, the 23andMe.
Yeah.
And did AfricanAncestry.com. And all the other ones put us, my family in Ghana and Wales, the European side. And then but the African Ancestry put us in, of course, Ghana, but they also put us in Moorish, Spain, and Portugal.
Uh-huh.
So I had to go get those vibrations back. So I'm thinking about moving there. I'm really thinking about moving.
I did one of them. I did. I think it was maybe 23andMe. I'm not quite sure, but some of the things that were popping up, I was like, look, it was just like Egypt. I was like, word? It's like, really? It's like, for real?
Yeah, they just came straight across through the straits.
Yeah.
Kept on rolling.
I mean, I just got to get this beard a little bit longer and I can actually try to claim it. I'll just start like really playing a character. It's like, why are you wearing this hat? What are you doing, bro? I'm going to have a whole aesthetic.
Our history has been, sheltered from us, but it's coming to light. So we're finding out a lot of things.
Yeah, and thank you. I think you're right, and thank you for this conversation. This has been good. Like I'm sitting here and I have been things that I've written down that I'm going to dive into deeper after this. So this has been truly a treat, truly a pleasure to talk to you for this time. And I want to close out. If you have any like plugs or shameless plugs to put in real quick in these final moments, I want to again thank you, and the floor is yours if you have anything you want to plug in these final moments.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to interview me. It's been an honor. I really love your show, and I encourage people to tune in to DC Radio every day at 4 p.m. Eastern and check it out. You can hear it at DC Radio 96.3 HD4. You can hear it online, dcradio.gov. You can check it out at TuneIn Radio. You can ask Alexa to tune in, check it out. Or you can check out the app for iPhone and Android to check it out. But it's a wonderful show.
Thank you so much. That was great. Someone advocating for me. That's wonderful. And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Maxx Myrick for coming on to the podcast and really giving us that history, sharing with us. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.